What is the difference between the higher 3D Earth ascension timeline and the lower 3D? Watch this video and find out. So I always talk about the higher 3D and the lower 3D and how those two places coexist, and yet there's always so many questions. What does it even mean? Because we live here and it's the same planet and it's still all the same physical stuff, right? Yes, it is the same physical stuff. That's why it's called the third dimension. But within the third dimension, there are different frequency pockets. Think of it like a range of vibration. So if you take a vibration and you make a graph of it, so certain frequency waves would be disharmonious and messy and connected to all sorts of control fields and the entropic system of not enoughness. And then there will be more harmonious energies. Something that, let's say, more in nature, when energy just flows and when all systems are supporting one another, when it's about cooperation instead of competition, when there is abundance, when there is a natural flow of energy that is beautiful and in balance. All the components of the system are in balance, and it's a self-sourcing system. You know, like nature in general, like everything is self-sourcing. It generates and regenerates itself. That's a syntropic system. So the range of disharmonious frequencies, that's what we call the lower 3D Earth. All of this is a third dimension, as in plane of existence, number 3. So we're still here in the 3D, as in we have material stuff, we have matter vehicles, the bodies we anchored into, but the disharmonious energies that vibrate into that matter, that's the lower 3D. The more harmonious ones, that's the higher 3D. Lower 3D is entropic system. Energy is being siphoned and there's not enoughness. Higher 3D is a syntropic system, which means it's a self-sourcing system and it has natural balance. It balances itself like a gyroscope. It constantly adjusts. While the lower 3D is always managed by somebody who is getting the benefit. So anything that is given is always given with some idea, what will I get back? Anything that is modified or supported or energy is involved is always done with some agenda behind it. That's a lower 3D consciousness. Now, morphogenic fields are ranges of group consciousness. So let's say being a victim, that concept of being a victim, animals don't have it. If one gets eaten by another, that's just life happens. There is no concept of victim. They don't feel victimized when like rabbit gets eaten by a fox. It doesn't feel like a victim. It just kind of goes, oh damn, I'm dead. So that's actually more natural because rabbit in some subconsciousness knows that it's part of a syntropic system and it will be recycled and reborn and nothing ever is gone. But we get so attached to our individuality from the ego perspective, not the soul perspective. That individuality is more of a focal point of consciousness as a unique personal perception. But instead, we get attached to the personality stuff. We get attached to our body, vehicle we're in, and then we start to think that this is all that's real. As soon as we do that, we then get concepts that are sort of off the bigger picture because we mutate them into what serves our limited range of perception. And lower 3D is filled with those morphogenic fields. All of them are controlled based. They are controlling one way or another. They're manipulating consciousness towards advantage of somebody and disadvantage of somebody. That's the definition of entropic system. Somebody has to win, somebody has to lose. That's all lower 3D. So morphogenic fields or group consciousness that exists within that range, let's say a victim, that would be one of them. Victim, victimizer. Somebody has to have desire for control and somebody has to have desire to be controlled or at least give their power away to the willing to be controlled, which is kind of the same thing, just without the happy desire in there. So that imprint of the victim-victimizer programming, we play that within ourselves. We don't even have to have somebody else outside controlling us, which does happen as well, but a lot of it is internal. We try to control ourselves instead of being in flow. So all of that is a lower morphogenic field that's related to victim-victimizer programming. There's also fields like sacrifice. Sacrificial implants that people get high on almost, like giving themselves up for some bigger cause that somehow that makes them so holy. It actually doesn't, because it erases that internal component of dignity and who the person is, and they just give their power away essentially. But to the system, it's still feeding the negative morphogenic field. So there's so many of those fields, they permeate lower 3D. And higher 3D has much more harmonious fields, but also if we think of morphogenic fields, that would be the field of consciousness, right? So much more harmonious consciousness. Like the concept of cooperation instead of competition, that is a consciousness that's much more harmonious because nobody has to lose. Idea that something can be in abundance even if physically it looks like there's not enough of it, that is not comprehensible in a lower 3D, because then once you run out of it, you run out of it. But that's a materialistic limited perspective without seeing the rest of what's out there in the full range, right? The same goes with any animal. When the animal dies, it gets recycled into the overall consciousness of that animal group. That soul sort of takes back that soul. So yes, no more body, but new body will be generated with that code. Same goes for animals that are extinct. If they don't exist anymore, their codes still exist. And on different dimensions, there are different animals that don't exist here in the third dimension, but used to. So that's another thing. The same thing with human souls, right? When we die, we don't actually disappear. The body does go away, the personality does dissolve, but the consciousness of who the person was in a soul sense gets, sort of recycled, right? We reincarnate until we're done with that by evolving further beyond that. But until we're still learning, we reincarnate. So this concept of eternity, of something going on and on and on and just developing and getting better and more of itself, that's a syntropic system that higher 3D holds. Lower 3D does not. Lower 3D, everything is always limited. In a lower 3D, there's always some sort of a not enoughness. So, apply this, please, within your own system. Think for a moment. How am I limiting myself? Any first thought that comes up. Now, that, whatever just showed up for you, that is how you are hooked into some morphogenic field in a lower 3D Earth. So, whatever that particular thing was. Maybe it was about being a victim, maybe it was about not being good enough, maybe it was about having to be something in order to get love, maybe it was about I'm not special enough, or whatever it was. Whatever that thing you came up with, that would be something you'd have to look into and work with in order to not continue this feeding of the entropic system. Because remember, somebody's benefiting and it's not going to be you. So somebody's siphoning then essentially your energy if you choose to be in that range. And we don't have to. Every person actually does not have to. But we do have to do our consciousness work in order to not be plugged in to those lower fields. That's why moving from the lower 3D to the higher 3D is so difficult. And it's not going to be by reading a book. And it's great to read a book. It's great to take a class. It's great to study. And please do study more. Because the more conceptual framework we have, the better it is for our consciousness. Because it has something to hold on to as we evolve. But unless that structural data is applied, so it's not just neutral out there information, and then not only applied, but actually permeating the fluid levels, the feeling, emotional part of us, it doesn't change us. It just remains as information. So, if we want to remain in a higher 3D, we have to do the work to unplug from the lower 3D. Nobody comes in here from the beginning of their lifetime and just ends up in the higher 3D. Because, first of all, higher 3D did not exist before 2012. Second, it's something that you have to have no karma, essentially, in order to be in. So everybody has some karma. Karma is unfinished lesson, something that we still have kind of carried over from a previous lifetime into this one. So let's say if you're a newborn baby, you come in here and you think, well, wouldn't that kid be in a higher 3D automatically? No, because that kid is not a new soul that never been here before. It's a reincarnated being that had many lifetimes and probably has all sorts of different karmic patterns to work out, and chose the family that, also has patterns to work out, and pretty much everybody is still within this web of the lower 3D. So it's true that this child could have more access to higher 3D if he or she does, their work. And because higher 3D now exists, we actually have that wonderful opportunity to be in the light and harmony more. Now that choice is easier. You don't have to make it up within your system and try to carry this bubble of, sort of happiness and vibrational joy and higher frequency while around you is a polluted swamp. But now we do have the range when it actually exists, and you can just pop into it and there it is. But it takes work to pop into it. And that work is the personal processing. It's application of all those higher concepts we always talk about, but practical steps to actually do it every day. And it takes a lot of attention, paying attention. I get asked that a lot, like, you want me to pay attention to this all the time? Not like once a month when I talk to you, or once in 2 months, or once in half a year, but like every moment? Yeah. It sounds impossible, but it's only impossible because, out of practice, right? We haven't built the muscles sort of for that. So think about it. If you want to go to, let's say, work out by, making a huge run, like you're going to run for an hour really, really fast up the hill. Well, let's say if you even make it, if you don't do that all the time, you'd be exhausted, hurting, and definitely would not want to do this anytime soon, right? Why? Not because you're not capable of running up the hill. Not because the body cannot do it, but because it's not used to it. So the systems that are required to do it, including psychological training that takes, let's say, to run a marathon. Well, if we don't have it, we can't just go for it and have it happen like that. Just like anything in education, right? If you want to learn something, you can't just, read it once and assume you learned it. You have to practice, and practice a lot. So consciousness, it's the same thing. Every time you want an upgrade, you kind of have to earn it by personal work. And if you do, you are supported by the entire universe. The solar council, your personal guides, everybody wants you to wake up. But we have to do our own work. Paying attention to how are we limited. What is it in us that kind of hooks us back into the lower 3D so that we can shift into the higher 3D and stay there more permanently? So hopefully this clarifies it for you guys. Be love. Be free. Be God. And don't forget to subscribe.